from happening in the future. I have a question. It's not meant as a gotcha question, so it just frame it there. But it is in regards to some reporting around a periodic transaction report that you had filed earlier, this year. So this is in July, pursuant to the ethical obligations as a senior executive official, $15,000 to $50,000 in a national coffee house chain, and between $50,000 to $100,000 in a semiconductor company on May 9th and May 12th. Are those transactions that you're doing personally, or are these through a stockbroker, or are these transactions that you're handling yourself?
So how they happen is I submit, they make the call.
Sure.
Yeah.
I guess my point would be, the reason why I ask this, why I said it's not a gotcha question, I have for years led an effort here in Congress to try to ban members of Congress, senior executive officials, from trading stocks. And it's bipartisan in nature. We're working really hard to get that done, Republicans and Democrats. And you can understand, I think, given your role, given the nature of the position that you for being here today, I have a couple of questions regarding a terrible shooting that occurred in Colorado, a state, as you may know, that I represent. You've testified previously about, I think, what you would describe as your efforts to provide more information regarding the investigation with respect to the horrific assassination of Mr. Kirk. And so, in that same vein, I'm hoping you can provide this committee and my constituents in Colorado with some clarity.
Absolutely.
I think, as my colleagues know, in Evergreen, Colorado, Jefferson County, a county that I proudly represent, at Evergreen High School, a shooter ultimately injured 2 students. Were praying for their swift recovery. There's an article here from Colorado Public Radio. The title is, quote, FBI was already investigating an account that may have been linked to the Evergreen shooter. You're familiar with the circumstances generally, Director, regarding this terrible tragedy.
Yes.
So my understanding from the public reporting is that an organization reported to the FBI in July of this year regarding, just reading here from the article, that the FBI opened an assessment into a social media account user whose identity was unknown and who was discussing the planning of a mass shooting with threats nonspecific in nature. This is the FBI's statement to the press. And that the FBI continued to work this assessment investigation to identify the name and location of the user up until September 10th, 2025, which was the day of the tragedy. Can you provide us some clarity on what were the impediments to finding, the account user, and maybe describe in greater detail the FBI's work in that regard?
Generally speaking, yes, because I know even though the shooter's deceased, the investigation we're not done.
Sure.
And so the impediments to finding these individuals, and you highlight a great point. We had 2 huge tragedies in the span of days in this country, the school shooting in Evergreen, Colorado being one of them. And proactively going out onto these social media platforms, which are so large, is our biggest impediment. And we need to rely on the service providers. There's actual legislation, I can't remember the name of it, that's up for renewal, which will, and I think at the end of the month, which gives service providers the ability to report that information in from their end without liability. We need that to continue, because while the FBI has so many people and the police are great at doing it, there's just too many platforms to cover down on.
Right here, the tone of the exchange subtly shifts from tragedy and public safety into something more pointed: accountability. Up to this moment, the questions are grounded in understanding what went wrong and why the FBI couldn't act in time. But now, the conversation begins moving toward personal conduct and decision-making. And that transition matters, because when oversight moves from systemic issues to individual actions, the stakes immediately get higher. The real question becomes, is this just about limitations in the system, or are there judgment calls that deserve closer scrutiny? That's where hearings like this start to get uncomfortable.
Well, I appreciate that, Director Patel, and I think we're certainly, I'm interested in continuing this conversation, because I think the reporting suggests that there's a pattern, and that ultimately, we want to make sure that law enforcement is able to prevent this kind of tragedy from happening in the future. I have a question. It's not meant as a gotcha question, so it just frame it there. But it is in regards to some reporting around a periodic transaction report that you had filed earlier, this year. So this is in July, pursuant to the ethical obligations as a senior executive official. You remember filing that in July?
Yes.
Yeah. So in that report, as best as I can surmise, you disclosed that you divested $100,000 or more in a variety of different stocks, which I presume was pursuant to the ethics agreement that you negotiated with the Department of Justice. In that same report, there's a disclosure regarding purchases of two different transactions. So between $15,000 to $50,000 in a national coffee house chain and between $50,000 to $100,000 in a semiconductor company on May 9th and May 12th. Are those transactions that you're doing personally, or are these through a stockbroker, or are these transactions that you're handling yourself?
So how they happen is I submit proposals under DOJ guidance to say, hey, I would like to trade this or that. And they run their review, and the FBI runs a review, and then they come back and say yes or no, and then I make the transaction.
Is there a reason that you decided to make the purchases into those two companies?
Generally speaking, before I got this job, I was, trading stocks, but not a lot like most people, and I just follow certain industries, and I thought they would be a good investment.
So the reason why I ask, right, because you had divested in other companies,
Yeah.
and I presume that wasn't because there were actual conflicts. It's just that you wanted to avoid an appearance of impropriety.
It was both.
Both,
Yeah.
but not all of the companies were conflicts.
Whatever they
you
make
divested from.
I don't make the call; they make the call.
Sure.
Yeah.
I guess my point would be, the reason why I ask this, why I said it's not a gotcha question, I have for years led an effort here in Congress to try to ban members of Congress, senior executive officials, from trading stocks. And it's bipartisan in nature. We're working really hard to get that done, Republicans and Democrats. And you can understand, I think, given your role, given the nature of the position that you hold as the leader of the largest law enforcement agency in our country, that divesting entirely, not doing day trading now, I think would be something that would be in the interest of the American people. So I just would hope you would consider that, and that moving forward, that perhaps not purchasing stocks in individual companies, I would think would be something that would be worth pursuing.
Gentleman's time is...
I'm happy to give the witness an opportunity to answer.
Thank you. I'll work.
What makes this exchange compelling isn't volume or confrontation. It's the shift in focus and what that reveals about accountability at different levels of power. It begins with a deeply serious issue, a school shooting, prior warning signs, and a clear question: why wasn't more done in time? The senator lays out a timeline that suggests the FBI was already aware of a potential threat, actively investigating an account tied to discussions of violence. That sets up a critical expectation from the public. If the warning signs were there, why didn't intervention happen sooner? The response we hear points to scale and limitation. Too many platforms, too much data, reliance on external providers. And to be fair, those are real challenges in modern law enforcement. The digital landscape is vast, and identifying threats before they materialize is incredibly complex. But here's where the tension quietly builds, because acknowledging difficulty isn't the same as resolving responsibility. Then the conversation pivots. And that pivot is where things become more politically charged. Instead of staying purely on systemic challenges, the focus shifts to personal financial decisions, stock trades, disclosures, timing. On the surface, this may seem unrelated, but it actually connects to a broader issue: public trust. When someone holds a position of immense authority, especially leading the largest law enforcement agency in the country, their personal decisions aren't just personal anymore. They're viewed through the lens of integrity, optics, and potential conflicts. Notice how the questioning evolves. It's not accusatory in tone. It's structured, almost careful. The senator even frames it as not a gotcha question. But the underlying implication is clear. Should someone in this position be actively trading individual stocks at all? Even if every move is technically approved, does it still create the appearance of a conflict? And that's the key word here: appearance. Because in positions of public trust, perception can matter just as much as reality. The official response explains the process: proposals, reviews, approvals, but it doesn't fully address the larger concern being raised: whether the practice itself should exist in the first place. This is where the exchange becomes less about what is allowed and more about what is appropriate. And that's a much harder question to answer. There's no explosive confrontation here, no shouting match, no viral gotcha moment. Instead, what you see is something more subtle, but arguably more important: a quiet pressure, a suggestion that the standards for public officials, especially at the highest levels, might need to go beyond what is legally permissible and move toward what reinforces public confidence. Because at the end of the day, institutions don't just rely on rules, they rely on trust. And trust is shaped not just by outcomes, but by decisions, optics, and consistency. So the takeaway here isn't just about one official or one hearing. It's about a broader question. Should those in powerful oversight roles be held to a higher standard when it comes to financial activity? And if so, where should that line be drawn? That's where this conversation leaves us. Not with a clear answer, but with a challenge. If you found this breakdown helpful, drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think officials in these positions should be allowed to trade stocks at all? Like the video, share it, and subscribe for more sharp, no-nonsense political analysis.